Welcome back to Nokus Reality, your home for the deepest dives into pop culture's biggest scandals and reality TV drama. When the Real Housewives of New Jersey icon Teresa Giudice married Louis Ruelas in a fairy tale ceremony, fans hoped she had finally found her ultimate happy ending. After years of legal turmoil, prison time, and a painful divorce, Teresa seemed ready for a peaceful life of love and luxury. But beneath the sparkling surface of their whirlwind romance, serious trouble was brewing. Over $3 million in federal tax liens soon came to light, exposing deeply hidden financial debts, secretive business moves, and a devastating breach of trust. For Teresa, history was repeating itself in the worst way possible. What began as whispers of financial trouble quickly spiraled into heated confrontation, broken vows, and an agonizing choice to protect her children, her legacy, and her future. At one point, they decided to go through with the divorce and formally completed the divorce process. This is the untold story of how love, money, and secrets tore apart one of reality television's most famous couples. Grab a seat. Let's step inside this high-stakes family drama. For years, Teresa Giudice has bared her soul in front of rolling cameras, giving audiences an unvarnished seat to her rawest grief and greatest victories. Viewers witnessed her develop an empire on The Real Housewives of New Jersey, turn table flipping into pop culture history, and face the terrible aftermath of a high-profile federal fraud conviction with her ex-husband, Joe Giudice. 11 months inside prison, a life-changing nightmare that stole her of her freedom, isolated her from her young girls, and left an everlasting scar on her spirit. As she walked out of prison, she vowed to her 4 kids that she would never again let financial illiteracy or misguided trust to jeopardize the safety of her family. When Louis Ruelas entered her world, he was a breath of fresh air, a passionate, loving guy who promised safety, emotional stability, and unconditional love. Teresa fell in love blindly. She was sure the universe was finally giving her the love story she had always deserved. They established a life of great public announcements, costly trips, and a blended family home. For the outer world, Teresa was in her love bubble, untouchable from the gloomy clouds that had previously loomed over her past. But real serenity was cruelly elusive. Almost as soon as Louis entered the Bravo realm, pointed questions started reverberating around reality TV circles. Critics, co-stars, and veteran watchers kept looking closely at his mystery business background, his past legal cases, and his forceful management style. At first, Teresa was vehemently defensive of her new spouse, attributing outside doubts to envy and nasty slander. Her loyalty was armor. She wouldn't let others damage the fairy story she'd fought so hard to believe. Yet, in the background, there were tiny changes beginning to occur. Subtle financial anomalies, whispered phone calls, and obvious anxiety began to sneak into their daily routine. Teresa fought against her impulses, fought hard to preserve her peace, but the chilling recollection of federal courtrooms kept repeating in her head. Financial documents from both state and federal governments were made public, shattering the idea of an impenetrable, affluent lifestyle and sending shockwaves through the entertainment world. The truth was exposed bare in official court records showing a total tax lien of more than $3 million against the couple. Divided up, reports showed one individual debt against Teresa Giudice for over $300,000, while her husband, Louis Ruelas, was slammed with a startling primary lien of just about $2.6 million, along with numerous other current claims. What had been talked about in whispers was now front-page news on major networks, blogs, and hot social feeds almost overnight. It was a jaw-dropping scandal to the general world. But inside the private walls of their huge New Jersey estate, it was a total structural collapse. A tax lien is not simply an overdue bill. It gives the government the right to take your physical property, garnish your wages, and potentially foreclose on your home if you do not act. Suddenly, the luxurious life Teresa had struggled so hard to regain was on a fragile foundation. Financial analysts and legal observers jumped into the fray quickly, noting that Teresa and Louie notoriously elected not to sign a prenuptial agreement before going down the aisle, dangerously tying their financial affairs together. The news hit online, and Teresa's world tumbled off its axis. The savage recollection of earlier court filings and state audits came flooding back, an all-consuming sense of choking. Her eldest daughter, Gia, valiantly tried to quell the storm on podcast appearances, reassuring anxious fans that her mother was the family's ultimate provider and worked endlessly and that everything would be handled. But inside, it was much more chaotic. Simply put, the debt was just too big to be ignored or dismissed as a clerical error of some sort. Teresa suddenly found herself at a complete nightmare crossroads. She looked into the scary abyss of repeating her own history, facing a yawning financial gap. A $3 million debt was not merely a threat to their bank balances. It was a pinprick to the protective dome of their marriage. As the news of the $3 million tax liens took over national headlines, the online realm turned into a war zone of public discussion. Reality TV fan accounts, entertainment writers, and casual observers analyzed over every last aspect of Teresa Giudice and Luis Ruelas' earlier utterances. Viral clips of the Real Housewives of New Jersey were flooding social media feeds, juxtaposing their beautiful, rose-filled wedding and costly Mediterranean holidays with the cold, hard financial details suddenly available in public court databases. But the contrast between their carefully cultivated image of opulence and the multi-million-dollar government allegations sparked a torrent of scathing public backlash. When Teresa decided not to sign a prenup before getting married in 2022, it immediately sparked a discussion among the Bravo fandom. Critics remembered her infamous appearance on a late-night talk program where she waved off the idea of a prenup, saying Louie had way more money and real love didn't need legal documents. Commentators called that choice an irresponsible omission, pointing out that her personal earnings, brand agreements, and future television income may be drawn into her husband's growing legal responsibilities if there were no clear legal limits. Co-stars who had previously voiced worries about Louie's unpredictable business dealings saw their warnings resurfacing as viral proof of an impending tragedy. Teresa felt like a horrific nightmare, repeated over and over by the media. She turned around and people were picking apart the finances of her family every place, from daytime talk shows to the comment sections on her own social media. The paparazzi gathered outside their private New Jersey neighborhood to capture anxious moments and hurried errands, while headline writers wondered if their multi-million-dollar Montville property would be at risk of probable foreclosure proceedings. It was no longer a story about unpaid taxes. Louie's genuine objectives were being questioned, his business experience, and whether he had intentionally introduced financial instability into Teresa's carefully rebuilt life. Every notification, every podcast interview, every news alert just piled on the burden in their household. Teresa sought to put a composed public face on the situation, stressing the togetherness and strength of the family, but the sheer level of public scrutiny was beginning to chip away at her defenses. The public revelation of the $3 million tax bill was stunning in its abruptness, but the private discoveries that followed hurt Teresa Giudice considerably more. Attorneys and reporters began digging into public land registries and court documents, and as financial specialists, they began uncovering alarming data about huge financial transactions Teresa had known nothing about. Official documents show that Luis Ruelas had surreptitiously taken out a $1 million loan against their huge $3.3 million Montville residence, a house that had initially been bought completely with cash. Things became worse when the loan's due date came and went, and Louie had asked for a formal extension while also getting another $250,000 line of credit that was secured by the residents. Teresa read about the mortgage changes in the press, and it was a painful treachery. It was a home they had carefully designed to resemble a romantic painting to symbolize their future together. And she had not known or agreed to it being put directly on the financial chopping block. Louie was the only member of the LLC that had the legal title to the property, which meant he was the only one authorized to utilize the house as collateral for his private business activities. There were also rumors his old tech businesses were dealing with continuing civil cases, shifting corporate liabilities, and secret personal loans, adding further weight to an already failing financial structure. The cruel precision of the sudden revelation hit Teresa. History was repeating itself in the most excruciating way possible. 10 years ago, she stood before a federal judge stating that she was an innocent spouse who signed real estate contracts out of utter confidence in her partner. Years after doing her time in federal prison and after promising her girls she would never be susceptible again, she found herself in the exact same routine. Louie had taken enormous high-stakes financial decisions without telling her, concealing loans, dodging taxes, and accruing dangerous liabilities that jeopardized the very stability of their family. The illusion of a transparent, shared collaboration dissipated at once in their opulent abode. Teresa knew how to combat financial loss through hard work, high-paying television contracts, and lucrative brand deals. But the fact that the guy who swore to protect her was hiding secret loans and crushing debt devastated her core. When new federal tax liens showed up for Teresa Giudice, it wasn't just a financial disaster. It was a deeply emotional trigger that immediately took her back to the darkest time of her life. In January 2015, Teresa reported to the Federal Correctional Institution in Danbury, Connecticut, to serve an 11-month term for conspiracy and bankruptcy fraud. That incident took away her privacy, her luxury, and, most terribly, her precious daily moments with her 4 little girls, Gia, Gabriella, Melania, and Adriana. When she walked out of those iron gates in late December 2015, she carried trauma that permanently changed the way she saw stability, security, and trust. During those hard months behind bars, Teresa survived on one promise: she would rebuild her life from scratch and never let herself be financially blind again. Since getting out, she's been busy writing best-selling autobiographies, landing big brand deals, and still being the undeniable star of The Real Housewives of New Jersey. Every income she earned went toward rebuilding her reputation and ensuring her girls always had a safe, permanent roof over their heads. Now, the sight of official government notices and million-dollar lien demands associated with her household again felt like an unpleasant, psychological recurrent loop. The language of IRS officials, federal court records, frozen assets was again her daily reality. It wasn't simply the money concern, it was the gut-wrenching, scary memory of losing her independence. She remembered nights, laying awake in a crowded prison dorm, counting the days before she could hug her children, wondering how a life of affluence had turned into an iron bunk. Teresa was devastated to the very core to know that her new marriage was teetering along the edge of comparable legal risk. She'd spent years telling her family and passionate audience that she was finished with legal turmoil. But sitting alone in her big master bedroom, looking at stacks and stacks of court records, she felt the oppressive chill of Danbury seeping back into her house. The flawless, overly polished fairy tale that Teresa Giudice and Ruelas sold to the public was officially beginning to crack. When they wed in a spectacular televised ceremony in 2022, Teresa joyfully declared that she had joined a permanent love bubble, a refuge of unconditional adoration, spiritual healing, and emotional protection. This refuge was the most treasured property of a woman who had undergone public betrayal, legal battles, and jail time. But the walls protecting that bubble began to crumble under severe domestic strain as multi-million-dollar tax liens, clandestine loans, and legal demands flooded their everyday lives. The cozy atmosphere that formerly pervaded the vast interior of the Montville house was now replaced by a thick, stifling quiet. The elaborate romantic gestures, the spontaneous social media posts, the continual public shows of devotion began to feel more and more rehearsed. Teresa was looking at Louie with a fresh and careful scrutiny, searching his eyes for answers he seemed unable or reluctant to deliver. Each leaked court document online, each phone contact from their attorneys added light years to the emotional distance between the pair. The financial walls were closing in on Louie, who had always presented himself as a confident protector and successful business tycoon, and he was becoming defensive. When Teresa's rising fears were raised, he tended to dismiss the mounting debt as regular corporate operations or minor accounting mistakes. Teresa, however, was not the innocent woman who took her husband's assurances at their face value. He had experienced the repercussions of financial illiteracy, and that attitude was a slap in the face to her brains and safety. The tension inevitably bled into their blended family dynamic. The energy changes were too delicate to ignore, no matter how hard they tried to keep up appearances for the youngsters. Dinners that formerly had been full with laughter became polite, short affairs. Teresa spent more time in her private sitting room, talking to her daughters and trusted advisors, while Louie went to his office to answer numerous phone calls about his failed business enterprises. They had a real home, but emotionally, their marriage was failing fast, and they stood on each side of a spreading chasm. The marriage of Teresa Giudice and Luis Ruelas was dealt a deadly blow when the full scope of their combined tax liens and secret financial encumbrances was finally revealed. The real problem in Teresa's relationship was much more than the crushing multi-million-dollar cash crunch. What hurt the most was the terrible understanding that the very foundation of any healthy partnership, transparency and trust in each other, had been totally destroyed. Money lost on debt, back taxes, or court fights may always be recouped by hard work, TV contracts, and lucrative brand endorsements. But the fight to recover from willful concealment, off-the-books loans, and quiet financial obligations was an entirely different fight. The calm hideaway they once had became an uncomfortable pressure cooker in no time. Arguments began to flare almost regularly inside their multi-million-dollar Montville house. Simple domestic issues quickly became bitter, emotional fights about accountability, undisclosed business deals, and the abandonment of fiscal responsibilities. Teresa wanted to know in no uncertain terms how their personal finances had become so dangerously entwined, why important decisions were made habitually without her specific knowledge and approval. She told again and again how deeply it hurt, since she had already faced the worst possible nightmare of federal incarceration from previous financial blindness and would never again allow herself to be drawn into comparable legal peril. The public scrutiny and the internal interrogation were forcing Louie into a corner, and his usual reaction was defensive frustration. He insisted that his firm was complicated and that all the debt and lien claims will eventually be paid by pending deals. But Teresa's increasing dread could no longer be soothed by vague pledges and fervent assurances. Every answer they came up with felt like a weak excuse for the cold, hard numbers that stared back at them from official court documents. Where their exchanges once had affection, now there was a cautious distrust. Teresa double-checked all the documentation, scrutinized every financial record that entered their home. The daily constant friction built an impenetrable wall between them. The deep trust that had previously let Teresa open her heart after years of heartache was pretty well gone. The pressure inside the home was becoming unbearable, and the public began to see small but indisputable hints that Teresa Giudice and Luis Ruelas were headed for a total meltdown. For years, Teresa's social media feeds had been filled with confessions of love, photographs of the pair, and sweet notes about their love story. But as the multi-million-dollar tax issue grew more heated, fan communities and eagle-eyed observers spotted a sudden and blatant change. Her daily affirmations of allegiance stopped, replaced with single photographs, cryptic quotations about inner strength, and peaceful times shared only with her 4 daughters. The public always has thoughts when a famous reality TV pair alters their social media activity, but this time it was much more than their Instagram habits. During podcast sessions and press appearances, Teresa's once ironclad position was visibly crumbling. But when she was asked about her husband's pending legal problems or their long-term financial planning by interviewers, she lacked her defensive fire. She no longer defended Louie as she used to, but gave short, careful answers, frequently changing the subject altogether to her children's welfare and her need for peace of mind. The emotional divide is translated behind closed doors into distinct lifestyles under one house. Family friends fed modest hints to the media, painting a picture of a household marked by strife, not togetherness. Louie traveled with Teresa less often, and she began to go to red carpet events and advertising engagements by herself. In one especially poignant piece, Teresa shared on air what it really takes to safeguard your self-respect, dropping painful clues that sometimes defending your family involves making choices you never expected. These public clues were crushing to millions of faithful Real Housewives viewers who had cheered on Teresa's second chance at love. The woman who had so fiercely defended her love bubble was now giving strong hints that the sanctuary was definitely over. Teresa Giudice was at a place she never thought she would go back to, with the crushing weight of endless emotional turmoil, rising debt, and profound uncertainty about the future. The silence was oppressive in the huge living room of their Montville estate. For months, she'd fought a desperate battle to save her marriage, to protect her girls from public mockery, to show to the world that her love story was real. But when she gazed across the table at Luis Ruelas, staring into the eyes of the man who had sworn to protect her, she knew that the most important ingredient of any holy relationship, unconditional trust, was nowhere to be found. Teresa knew better than anyone how money might be lost and then earned back through hard effort, perseverance, and dedication. She had built a life from nothing before, clawing her way out of the darkest chapters of her past to build a multi-million-dollar personal brand. Financial struggle was a tough challenge, but one she knew how to overcome with sheer force of will. But what she couldn't fix was a foundation based on deliberate silence, concealed liabilities, and broken promises. Every hush-hush loan, every lien they tried to hide, every justification she brushed aside had eaten away at the loyalty she'd once given so freely. Teresa gazed at Louie with extraordinary serenity and a heavy, aching heart, and she stated the awful truth that was developing inside her soul. She stated in a calm way that financial losses could be made good in time, but that destroyed trust was almost impossible to regain once it was broken. She couldn't go on living in terror of what official notification would arrive in the mail, what secret debt may be uncovered next. Her main function, as it had always been, was to ensure the future safety, emotional calm, and financial security of her 4 children. It was an agonizing emotional pill to chew to walk away from a second high-profile marriage, especially under the unforgiving glare of the national media. But Teresa understood that a partnership built on continuous deceit posed a greater risk than the shame of being alone in the public eye. The signature on the official divorce petition struck Teresa Giudice's life like a tsunami of devastating finality. For months, the decision had hovered over her like a dark cloud. But to write it on the court paper, she took a terrible personal battle and converted it into a public, legal reality. Teresa worked with her legal team to ensure that the file was complete and accurate and was designed to protect the assets she had left. Her number one goal was very simple: financial separation from Luis Ruelas and insulating her future television revenues, brand partnerships, and personal assets from his ever-growing list of state and federal tax responsibilities. The news of the divorce filing spread like wildfire throughout major news agencies and resulted in endless headlines, breaking alerts, and hot debates across social media platforms. Entertainment writers and legal analysts talked on the thought process behind the petition, explaining that it was important for Teresa to move quickly before any other tax liens or aggressive creditor claims might attach themselves to her personal accounts. It was excruciating for a lady who had her private life dissected on national television for more than a decade to have her second marriage dissolve in a public courthouse. But this was not like the other legal battles she had fought. No, this one was on her own terms. This was a calculated move, a determined move to take back control of her financial fate. The legal papers also made precise demands about the split of their marital assets, including the multi-million-dollar Montville estate that had become a symbol of their financial entanglement. Teresa's counsel fought to draw a clear line between her profits and Louie's multi-layered corporate endeavors so that the debts of one partner would not forever bankrupt the other. The public disputed if it was financial self-defense or the logical end of a romance gone sour, but those closest to Teresa knew it was an act of intense mother protection. To file the papers was to do far more than dissolve a legal contract. This was a formal announcement that Teresa Giudice was not going to be the passive victim in her own life tale again. Teresa Giudice has officially put the legal drama behind her, with the final divorce decree signed, closing the most tumultuous chapter of her adult life. The court officially dissolved her marriage, ending months of intense public speculation, heavy negotiations, and emotional suffering, and severing her legal and financial links to Luis Louie Ruelas for good. Teresa, with her liberty still intact, drew a long, deep breath, a breath of actual freedom standing beyond the legal domain. The multi-million-dollar tax liens from the government, shadowy loan obligations, and increasing company liabilities that had threatened to pull her back into a nightmare were now legally severed, shielding her hard-won income, television legacy, and personal brand from future collapse. Teresa didn't see the end of the divorce as a moment of defeat, but as a great reawakening of her own self-determination. She had suffered the world's bitter judgment twice, felt the pain of treachery twice, and twice had emerged with her head held high in dignity. She returned home to her 4 daughters, Gia, Gabriella, Melania, and Adriana, and the strong relationship that had always been the heart of her strength. They stood next to their mother, watching her build her life again and over again, proud of her brave decision to choose peace over illusion. And Teresa channeled her no-holds-barred existence into creating her media empire, fueling her successful podcasts, new book initiatives, and upcoming television projects with her unfiltered experiences. The unpleasant experience had changed her from a trusting partner into a ruthlessly watchful businesswoman, personally supervising every contract, account, and investment with microscopic precision. Meanwhile, Louie was relegated to the background, left to deal with his complicated legal issues and multi-million-dollar debt load all on his own, without the glow of Teresa's celebrity to protect him. At its heart, this high-stakes drama is a compelling monument to a woman's tenacious fight for survival, self-preservation, and self-respect. Teresa Giudice showed that, despite the allure of the romantic promise of a great fairy tale, no relationship is worth risking your peace of mind or your family's safety. Do you believe Teresa Giudice made the ultimate power move by walking away from Louie before her financial empire was completely destroyed? Was this divorce her only option to protect her 4 daughters from history repeating itself? Or could the couple have survived if Louie had been transparent from day one? And where do you see Teresa heading next in her reality television journey? Drop your thoughts and theories in the comments section below. Don't forget to hit that like button, turn on notifications, and subscribe to Nokus Reality for more exclusive deep dives into the biggest pop culture stories. Until next time, stay tuned.